So welcome to this last technical session of ST30. We start with Martin Vassor presenting work with Nobuko as well, and a call to the community. Let's hear it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, as you just said, this is a call to the community because it's not even a side project, but more an idea that we have, and we want to build or to gather some protocols, some standard things that we usually see in MPST, and to make something of like that would look like a benchmark, but not in the same sense as the benchmark Lorenzo presented yesterday. And as I will, sorry, with the same laptop, but a different project. And yes, I will try to convince you that this needs to be something that is led by the community and that I cannot do alone. We cannot do in a single team, but it would be helpful to have like feedback from everybody. And so that's why I think here was a good place to present you this. Before starting, I would say I'm very glad that many of you presented before, so I could shorten a lot of the slides I prepared, and so hopefully we'll have a bit more time for the discussion. The main starting point for this idea is that, well, when we look at session types, we have a lot of different implementation, and here I cite just 4 of them, and those are only implementation in Rust, which is just one programming language amongst many others. And it is just to illustrate that there are many of them, and they are not the same. Like Sesh, for instance, is for binary session. If I'm not mistaken, Multicrust is for synchronous session. And so they are alike, but kind of different. And as we had a very nice talk yesterday about different expressiveness for different variants of session types, well, we also have to accommodate for all those possibilities that exist. And so the main point is how do we compare those things from more of an implementation viewpoint. When we are writing papers, often we have the following pattern. We think something is missing, we present an extension for session types, and we argue that this new extension is useful with respect to what we mentioned was missing. We propose an implementation, or we adapt an existing implementation, and then we evaluate the improvement of the things we add or the overhead if we have some new feature. And among those 4 different points, well, my question is how do we address those 2 points? And arguing for the usefulness of an extension is fairly easy. We find an example. We say, well, this example is difficult to implement using what exists already, and so we would like to address this example. Evaluating the improvement or evaluating the performance of a modified implementation is a bit more tricky, because if we focus only on the example that motivates our extensions, then we risk to be cherry picking what we evaluate. And so usually we would like to do that with carefully chosen protocols, so things that we recognize in the community are important for us in general. And as I just said, how do we do that without cherry picking? Well, we need to agree on something that makes sense. And so this is kind of the goal that I would like to share with you today. And it's an open question, and which is what set of protocol would represent overall the needs of the community. And I'm very glad yesterday, Nobuko, in your future work or future direction, you had this small line about benchmarks, and here I think we can relate to this. So what are the main difficulties I identified so far? So the main one, obviously, is to address or to have a meaningful set of protocols. And what I mean by that is, on my own or in the emerging team, we can like say, oh, we think this and that is important. If we look at other papers, we can identify patterns that occur frequently, but we are always at the risk of missing something. And so that's why we are all together. So I think it's a good moment for everybody to say, oh, I want this to be included, I want that to be included. And in particular, one of the other main points that I think is important is that we need to address a lot of variants of MPST or a lot of different implementation of MPST, and we have to keep that in mind, not to pick something for a specific implementation. So before I continue here, if you want to have a look at what we have so far, feel free to go. It's online, and thank you. And I will just briefly describe now what you can find on this repository. So to address that, I will explain what was the way I view that, and obviously it's open for criticism if you think we should do something differently. And from an individual viewpoint, I think the best I can do for gathering a meaningful set of protocols is to look at what exists already in the literature. And sometimes, I mean, even that is not necessarily a trivial task, because sometimes we have the same protocols that are actually renamed between different papers, or sometimes we have protocols that are very similar or that exhibit similar constraints or requirements, and maybe it would be interesting to have, say, one canonic protocol for each of those classes. And to address various MPST implementations, here we have, I think, two sides of this coin. The first side is, well, if we try to explain to people that are not necessarily part of the community what we are doing, I think it's important to kind of document what is in this benchmark. And so there is, for each of the protocols I will present in the next slides, there is a PDF that you can take. You can copy paste the source, put it in your paper if you want, and that is hopefully readable even by someone that is not necessarily part of the community. The second side of the coin is, if we want to address a benchmark for implementation or evaluating implementations of MPST, we have to somehow make those protocols available for a given implementation. And this is a bit tricky from a technical viewpoint, because there is not a single canonic way to represent MPST for implementation. So we have the Scribble language, which is a possibility that is quite easy to parse and to put into actual implementation. So here I also provide, so not a Scribble, but a new Scribble, which is almost the same description of each protocol, and hopefully that can make it easier to use. I just want to have a quick word on what I consider as selection criteria, and this is where the controversial part begins, because I assume that we all have different opinions on what is important or not. But at least I think it's important to have both binary and multi-party protocol, because, I mean, there are implementations that are only binary, and we should not exclude those. Similarly, I'm very happy that yesterday we had a talk about reactive session, because at the end there was this question about choice, and maybe we can, how can we add choice? And this illustrates, in my opinion, that choice is not necessarily trivial, and so we can have protocols that have choice in them, protocols that don't have choice in them. Regarding recursion, I think you're all much more aware than I am about the difficulty of recursion, all the variants that exist, and how all the way it can be addressed. So similarly, we can have protocols that do have recursion, some that don't have that. And then the fourth point is a bit of an arbitrary one, but it's just to illustrate that maybe from specific features such as dynamic connection or the creation of new participants, but it can be other things such as delegation or things like that. Maybe we can get protocols from papers with such feature and try to see how could we do something that would be similar or that would have something analogous in, say, normal or vanilla MPST. So those are the criterion I've thought so far. Obviously, if you have other ideas or if you want to argue that those are not meaningful, I'm very happy to hear your feedback. And as I said previously, so those are the way to categorize the protocols. Then when we do things, when we pick protocols, we have to keep in mind that maybe it's not, we should not try to reinvent the wheel, reuse existing protocols, as I said before. And also, if possible, when possible, we can try to have examples that are suitable for extensions, or if you have in mind that you may want in the near future to develop session type with that, and you already have an example or a motivating example for that, it makes sense to try to figure out and to put it in this set of protocols. So I won't enter into all the details, but this is what we have so far, and you can probably recognize some of the protocols that you often see in papers. For instance, the famous two buyers example or travel agency. Some of them are slightly modified. For instance, multiply and quit. I think it still comes from one paper. There is the reference in the repository online, but this is basically the most simplest thing you can have without recursion, without choice, and only binary. So it's very simple, but it's still important, I think, to have that. Now, if you go on the link I've given before, so you would find something that looks like that. And as I said, you have on the one hand the new Scribble source, and on the other hand the PDF sources. And so the new Scribble look like that. So if you are not familiar with Scribble, as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. And the point is, it's both easy to have or to import in your implementation. We already have quite good tooling. For instance, if you are not concerned about projection, there is a new Scribble tool that does the projection for you and gives you the local types or the automata of the participants. So this is why it's quite interesting to have that. And also it's quite easy to extend if you want. There are ways to add annotations that makes it quite easy to parse if need be. On the other hand, as I said, we also have the documentation side of this benchmark. So for each of the protocol, you would have a file that looks like that. And as I said, the idea is to have something in standard MPST, and as you probably know, there is no standard MPST, but the idea is that someone that doesn't really know what is MPST or doesn't really know all the subtlety about that can come have a look at that and understand the main idea of, or have the core feature of that are frequently common in different variants. Also, I tried to each time to go back to the first time each example appeared in a paper. It's sometimes a bit difficult because maybe sometimes the chain of citation was broken or things like that. Again, if you see a mistake or something like that, just let me know. As I said, the source are provided, so it's also when you're writing a paper, instead of rewriting again and again the same thing, just copy paste the thing. It's available, and it makes it fairly easy to have the examples in the papers. Sometimes examples, so this one is not the case, but sometimes examples were a bit slightly modified from their initial presentation for practical purposes. For instance, if it comes from a modified MPST or MPST with an extension, I tried to remove that extension and to have something equivalent. When it's the case, there is always an explanation that relates exactly what was done in that. Now you might be asking why I'm presenting this, because it's, as you can see, very much not technical, and it's very much a work in progress, but I think it's useful if you can come and say, well, you are missing this example that highlights this feature, and this does not appear yet in the set of protocols that you have. And in the end, if we want to use this set of protocols to reach a broader audience when we publish in conferences that are not necessarily focused on MPST, and we want to address people that are from programming language or even a wider audience, maybe I think it could be beneficial for the whole community if we had this set of protocols that we don't need to argue that each of them is meaningful. If we could just say, well, this set of protocol we agreed as a community as being something useful. Here it is, and take our word for that. And here is how we compare to existing things. And this is why I think your feedback is important for this work and for this work to continue. As this is work in progress, the main part is the future work. And here there are two different things. So on our side, and I'm willing to put a bit more work on that. So the main direction I can imagine are first, maybe providing a default implementation for reference. Here it's a bit tricky whether we should provide an implementation, whatever it is, even if it's not the most, say, up-to-date or state-of-the-art or more performant if you want, just to have something as a reference, or whether we want to have the current state-of-the-art implementation, and here we have to argue on what is the state-of-the-art one. On the others, another point that we can do is provide some tooling. So as I said, for instance, New Scribble also already comes with plenty of tools that makes our life easier, but I can think of other things. Typically, if we agree on a given set, maybe I can write a Docker file, then you just put your implementation in that, and it runs all the benchmark for you, and even maybe generate the tables that then are to be included in your papers. I don't know what makes sense for the community, but we can think of many things. And of course, on our side, the next point is insert your request here. So if you have ideas what we can do in here, let us know. I'm very happy to hear that. On your side now, what you could do if you think this is an interesting project. The first thing is using it, and using it in a broad sense. That is only, like, even if you're only interested in finding where an example comes from initially, and you just go on this repository and find the reference, this is already useful, in my opinion. If you want to have a deeper use of that and to actually use it for comparing your implementation or improving your implementation, this is even better, but there are many ways this could be used. The second point is criticize it. As I said, this is just from my viewpoint for now. We discussed that with Nobuko, but it's very limited, and we have a very different background, and I think if you come with criticism, that can only make the thing better overall. And finally, typically points of criticism is like, if you think this doesn't fit your need for whatever reason, just let us know, and we can discuss that. Or I mentioned that previously, but also, for instance, the selection criteria, I'm very well aware that this is a bit arbitrary for now. You probably have good ideas, and I think it's good if you could, discuss with us. And finally, if you have a lot of time to devote to that, you can also improve it. I mean, it's on GitHub. I'm very happy to give you access rights if you are interested in that. If you have any ideas to improve that, just drop an email. So that's the plan for now. This has the assumption that you find it useful. If as a community we don't think this is useful, I'm fine dropping it, but it might also be the opportunity to start this project. Yes, it's obviously a work in progress. And so I hope you have questions or remarks, but if you don't, I wrote 2 of them for you right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the talk and for the initiative. I think it's a very important contribution. Yes, please.
Hey, thanks for your talk. That sounds very nice. Maybe I have missed that, but do you only consider protocols that are positive in the sense that there are projections, or do you also consider like having some that are negative? Because other benchmark suites for SAT, for example, would have both kind of examples.
So I would say it depends. I mean, I'm open to everything, and I didn't think about what you just mentioned, and it makes a lot of sense. The initial starting point for me was to compare implementation, so they need to be projectable, but it would make it would make sense also if we want to go a bit more on the theory side and compare, for instance, implementation of projection, like typically New Scribble versus your favorite tool. We could totally include such kind of negative examples.
Thanks.
Do you think it would also be interesting for your repository to collect results of the benchmarks from particular systems and tools? So then instead of, if you want to see what has been achieved so far, you can look to the repository instead of searching for papers that are reporting the benchmarks for new tools?
Yes, I think it's, from a technical viewpoint, it's not necessarily very difficult to do. I mean, it's just a git push once in a while. The only thing that we have to be careful is if we cannot just take results from this paper and compare them with results from that paper, because they might come from different computers. But if a user of this benchmark is happy to share the source of their implementation, I can totally have a quick script that runs it on my computer and compare on, say, a fair basis for that. But it could totally be, included in that. And I don't think it requires that much work.
So this is a follow-up on Felix's question. So do you envisage also to suggest a list of open problems, so to say, or desirable practical protocols one would like to be able to model and which aren't currently handled?
Yes, this is a very good question, and it's difficult to do so if we look only at the protocols that are in the papers, because, well, often when we put protocols in our papers is to argue that we can solve them. But if, as a community, we say that, we would like to solve, for instance, or to implement this protocol, and so far we don't have a paper that do it, I think it makes total sense to include it as well. Then comes the question of whether we can explicitly mark it as an open problem, and this is where, in the documentation, the PDF side of the thing, it's very easy. It's, from a technical viewpoint, this is very basic, and we can totally add a line like this protocol so far cannot be implemented in the non-implementation of MPST or just session type. So yes, yes.
Thanks for the initiative. I think it's really an urgent need for people to understand, especially for people outside the community, you see, because sometimes even our own students, they try to understand things and it's hard to point them out. So in that direction, one particular experience I have had is that students, they don't know which papers, how to navigate the papers, right? And sometimes you have these examples, they come from specific papers, and the two-vendor example comes from many different papers in different flavors. So as a suggestion, but without trying to abuse of your initiative and free will, is to actually put some links to the papers and to the DBLP entry or whatever, you see, because part of the difficulty of understanding these things is actually navigating the history and the connection between the different papers, because sometimes you have this paper that proposes something, then this is improved in a follow-up paper, then the protocol changes a bit, and so on. So collecting the examples is great. It's really a very, very important step. It will be nice also to have this connection with the DOI, for instance, of the paper where it was appeared.
Yes, and again, this is the strength of the community. I didn't really think at all about that. The point of having the citation was just to include the original one, but as you said, it makes total sense to also keep track of the length of citation. And again, this is work we have to do anyway when we want to go back to the original thing. That it wouldn't take that much additional work to put it in as well.
Thanks very much for your talk. I know that you expressly are not concerned about the criteria right now, but I just wanted to ask a kind of question. If you go back to the list of examples that you had, it's not to focus on what you chose. I just noticed that a few of these came from some papers where it was session types plus refinements, let's say. I was just wondering, did you keep the refinements in here, or?
So no, so some of them, like typically when it comes from session type with refinement, this is where I try to remove the refinement type, and so obviously we lose something, like we lose what we get from refinement, but the point was to have a motivating example and say, and then we can also argue, like, with standard session types, you can only achieve that without having the guarantee, for instance, that the loop is bounded. And then if you do that with the refinement, you can have a bit more. But the point, yes, is to try to get rid of what is specific to each individual paper.
Thanks, that I think answered my question. And just to follow what Roy is saying, I think somewhere in this presentation you mentioned I cite the first one where it appears. You may as well cite them all, right? Just link all of them. There's no need to just record the first one. I think that'd be really helpful.
So this is, instead I think this is painful to do, but a feature that I would consider useful would be not removing features, so like for the refinements and stuff, and actually when, and ideally, okay, the database gets bigger, and then you implement in the website a search based on features and things. So I want to write a paper on refinements. No, that's the example, sorry. On refinements, I have the search say refinements, and it shows me protocols that are relevant to my criterion.
Yeah.
So I think this is definitely useful. I'm aware that this might be more difficult to maintain.
And I think here there is also a bit of what is the point. And I see two different directions, and they are not necessarily exclusive, and we can probably do both. But there is also, I think, this aspect of if we want to compare compare different evaluations of protocol, we should have, I think, a fixed set of protocols that we could say, well, we have those 15 protocols, for instance, that we consider are a basis for evaluation. And so if we want to address the largest possible amount of implementation, then we have to try to be agnostic of any specific features. Now, this is absolutely not exclusive with having this well-defined set of protocols, but also having as a reference, actually, this comes from this paper on refinement where it initially looked like that. And where, in this case, yes, we could have like a broader or more like a big wiki of protocol where we could just navigate the thing. Even if they are not part of, I mean, we would have then the collection of known protocols and the benchmark for evaluation. That would be two different things, but it's not necessarily exclusive. I think we can do both.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that's an amazing effort and really helpful for the session type community, because sometimes I think that if we try to publish in the larger PL community, then we're still a bit outsiders, and having a repository of benchmarks or examples, I think would be really helpful. I was wondering, did I understand correctly? Right now, it's the examples are Scribble based.
Yes.
I see. But I guess probably like, let's say if you wanted to include examples of binary or even like the different kinds of families of session types. So.
Yeah, this is where I think I put Scribble because it's the thing I know the best.
For sure.
And this is what I meant by this is very arbitrarily.
Right.
If you prefer to use another specification language, let me know. It takes time to encode things, but when it's done, and I think we can address, and the more input kinds or input standards we have, the better in the end.
I agree.
So we need to conclude this session, but for sure that after the break in the panel discussion, this probably will come up again, so we'll have an opportunity to continue. Just two quick suggestions. One is to organize with respect to properties, not only with respect to versions, but also that these protocols were proposed exactly to show that the system enjoys of this particular property. So that's an organization that I miss. And the second one is that in the program verification community, for a long time, there is this competition. And this competition is good not by itself, but for people to look to the benchmarks and to show their tool and compare in this competition the tool. And it gives visibility, it gives a criticism of an auto-criticism and a comparison with others. So maybe this year is too soon, but since this verification competition takes place usually with ETAPs, for 2025 we could think of organizing something, because typically the problems of the software verification competition are problems that are not suitable for behavioral types. And so if we have our own benchmark and we propose them like a track of that verification competition with our benchmarks or with our property-oriented problems, then this could give visibility as well. Thank you.
Thank you.